2 hours after burying my 8-year-old son, my phone rang with a call that changed my life forever. The trembling voice of his teacher could barely hold itself together as she told me, "Ma'am, I found something you need to see with your own eyes. Come to the school right now and meet me in the teacher's lounge. Don't tell your family or anyone else. This is dangerous." Oh! When I finally arrived at the school, the figure I saw standing in front of the door made me shudder from head to toe. I never could have imagined that the person cornering the teacher inside was my own husband. But before we get to that moment, let me start at the beginning. And as the narrator of my channel always used to say before the story begins, drop a comment telling us which city you're listening from, and don't forget to like and subscribe so this story reaches more people. 2 hours after laying my son Zion to rest, the house felt like a frozen hell. The piercing scent of lies and funeral wreaths mixed with the smell of damp earth clinging to the hem of my black dress. People kept drifting in and out of the living room, murmuring words of condolence that sounded hollow and distant, as if they were speaking from the bottom of a tunnel. They said I had to accept God's will, that Zion was at peace in heaven now. But none of those phrases could soothe the pain tearing apart my chest, as if someone were ripping it open from the inside. Zion was only 8. He was a healthy, restless boy, always running from one place to another with an energy that was contagious. The doctor had said it was a massive heart attack, a rare case, an anomaly. I didn't believe it, but I didn't have the strength left to argue. I took refuge in my bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the framed photo where Zion smiled proudly, holding a track and field trophy between his hands. Outside, my husband Marcellus was receiving and saying goodbye to visitors with red eyes, a swollen face, and slumped shoulders, looking as if he carried the weight of the world on his back. Everyone praised Marcellus's strength. They said he was an exemplary husband and an admirable father, who remained standing only to support his shattered wife. Through the half-open bedroom door, I saw him hugging Mr. Sterling, the president of the foundation where Zion went to school. The older man was patting him firmly on the back, offering comfort like a father consoling a son. That scene should have moved me, but something in my stomach turned. A wave of nausea I couldn't explain. That was when my phone resting on the quilt began to vibrate. The lit-up screen showed the name of Miss Vanna, Zion's teacher. I frowned. Why was she calling me at a time like this? She had been at the funeral. I had seen her crying by the casket myself. With a trembling hand, I slid my finger over the green button and brought the phone to my ear. The voice on the other end was so low it sounded like a whisper drowned in fear. Ms. Vanna's breathing was ragged, as if she were hiding in a dark closet. She asked me to listen carefully, saying she couldn't repeat herself. She said she had found something I needed to see with my own eyes, something that had been left forgotten in the drawer of Zion's desk. Her voice cracked when she begged me to come to the school immediately and wait for her in the teacher's lounge. She stressed a condition that froze my blood. I wasn't to tell anyone, not even my family. She repeated that it was dangerous, that I couldn't trust anyone but her. I felt my heart start to pound with an uncontrolled force. The grief that had paralyzed me suddenly transformed into a sharp alert that pierced through the fog of pain. There was something urgent, something dark related to my son. I felt it in the way Vanna breathed on the other end of the line, in the contained desperation of her words. My mother's instinct, the one that until then had only hit a wall of helplessness in the face of death, ignited with brutal clarity. I wiped my tears away with the back of my hand, forced myself to stand up, and took a deep breath. I had to go. I had to know what was so dangerous about what she had found. I walked out of the room, dragging my feet, finding a fatigue even heavier than what I truly felt. I approached Marcellus, who was still talking to Mr. Sterling on the porch. I whispered that I had a terrible headache, that I needed to go to the corner store to get my migraine medication because I had left it in the car, and that I wanted to get some fresh air. Marcellus looked at me with a tenderness that would have convinced anyone. He offered to go in my place, but I gently rejected him, telling him I needed 15 minutes alone to clear my head. Mr. Sterling smiled, advising me not to take too long, that the night breeze wasn't good for someone so weak. I agreed with a nod and headed toward my car. As I drove toward Zion School, the city seemed to stretch out into infinity. A fine drizzle began to fall, making the asphalt shine with the yellowish reflections of the streetlights. My mind was a whirlwind. What had Vanya found? Why was she so scared? And why did she forbid me from talking to Marcellus? Until that moment, he had been an exemplary father, attentive, patient, dedicated. I told myself over and over that he couldn't be involved in anything dangerous. However, a small seed of doubt began to break through. Slow and stubborn, like roots cracking through cement. Scenes from the last few months that I hadn't wanted to look at too closely came rushing back. Zion's stomach aches, his sudden fatigue, the afternoons he fell asleep in random corners. I remembered how Marcellus insisted on personally handling his medicines, and how angry he got when I suggested taking the boy to a doctor other than the family physician, that distant cousin of Mr. Sterling, who, according to them, knew Zion's history better than anyone. All of that, which until then had just been background noise, began to align in my memory like pieces of a sinister puzzle. The school looked ominous at night. The main gate was ajar, as if someone had left it that way on purpose. I didn't see the security guard in his booth. Maybe he was making rounds. Or maybe there was simply no night shift because classes were suspended following Zion's death. I parked the car far away under the shadow of a massive oak tree so no one would recognize the vehicle from the street. I ran across the courtyard under the drizzle with my heart beating in my throat and headed toward the building where the teacher's lounge was located on the second floor. The hallway on that floor was completely dark, lit only by the faint light coming up from the exterior gardens. However, I could distinguish a thread of light escaping from the bottom crack of the lounge door. It was open a few inches. Vanya must be inside. I quickened my pace, but the closer I got, the more oppressive the air became. My whole body told me something wasn't right. The silence was so thick that only my steps, amplified by the tiles, could be heard. Zion's voice came to mind, telling me how affectionate Miss Vanya was, how much he loved her. If she had reached this point of fear, it had to be something very serious. I stopped in front of the half-open door and held my breath before peeking inside. What I saw paralyzed my heart. Ms. Vana was cornered near the filing cabinets. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror, and her whole body was trembling like a leaf. She had her hands raised in a gesture of pleading, as if asking for mercy. In front of her, with his back to me, stood a man in a black shirt that I knew all too well. His posture, the way he shifted his weight onto one leg, even the faint scent of his cologne drifting into the hallway, were unbearably familiar. The man held a small black object in his hand, a device that looked like a USB drive or a portable disk. He was speaking to Vanna in a low tone, loaded with menace, a cold, sharp voice without a shred of affection. It was a voice so different from the one I heard every day at home that for a second I refused to believe it. I pushed the door gently. The hinges creaked, betraying my presence. The man spun around instantly, alert, and the white neon light illuminated his face fully. My legs went weak, and I had to grab the doorframe to keep from falling. It was Marcellus, my husband, the father of my newly buried son. Marcellus looked at me without surprise, as if he had calculated from the beginning the possibility that I might show up there. His expression, which a moment before had been pure ice, slowly transformed into a mask of contained pain, the same one he had worn all day in front of family and friends. He disguised the black device, sliding it to his side, trying to hide it from my view. I looked at Vanna, who was now crying silently, her lips trembling and her hands still raised. My mind refused to understand. Marcellus was supposed to be at home receiving people, crying with me. What was he doing here? Why was he threatening our son's teacher? What was in that device that was so important? The silence became suffocating. I could hear the hum of the air conditioner and Vanna's slight stifled sobs. Marcellus broke the tension, approaching me with a calm stride, like someone standing in front of a frightened animal trying to soothe it. His face changed again, becoming that of a fragile husband, broken by grief. He opened his arms as if to hug me, and with a raspy voice said he didn't expect me to come to the school. He claimed he had only come because he couldn't stand being at home, surrounded by memories of Zion. He claimed he had gone to collect the boys' things, that he wanted to keep them safe before the cleaning crew emptied the desks the next day. His explanation sounded reasonable, almost touching, and if I hadn't seen the scene from a few seconds earlier, I might have collapsed into his arms without questioning anything. But the image of Vanna, cornered with fear in her eyes, remained stuck in my brain. I sought the teacher's gaze. I needed confirmation, a crack of truth amidst so many lies. Vanna was shaking. Her eyes darted from Marcellus to me as if she were at a deadly crossroads. When Marcellus glanced at her sideways with that threatening glint I had never seen before, she hurried to nod. With a broken voice, she confirmed his version. Yes, Marcellus came to get Zion's things. We were remembering what a good boy he was. I knew she was lying, the cold sweat running down her temple, her fingers gripping the hem of her skirt until her knuckles turned white. It all gave her away. Marcellus slid his arm around my shoulders and squeezed too hard with an insistence that hurt. He said we should go back home, that it wasn't good for me to be in a place that only reopened the wound for so long. On the table lay a cardboard box with drawings, notebooks, and some of Zion's pencils. With an almost imperceptible gesture, Marcellus tucked the small black object into his pants pocket. He thought I wouldn't notice, but I saw it clearly. Before leaving, he moved toward the door first. In that minimal instant, Vanna rushed toward me. She pretended to fix my hijab, which was slightly crooked from the rain, and her freezing fingers grazed my neck. I felt her slide something inside the fold of the fabric near my shoulder. Her eyes locked onto mine. In them, I saw a desperate plea and an urgent warning. Her lips moved without making a sound, but I could clearly read the words she articulated. Run. My heart raced. I forced myself to appear calm. I nodded as if thanking her for the gesture and took a step back. Marcellus turned around, watching us with a certain suspicion. He asked what we were saying. I answered quickly that Vanna was just asking me to be strong, to pray, and to take care of my health. He seemed convinced. He took my hand, and we left the room, leaving Vanna behind, alone in the middle of that silent room, rigid as a wax statue, about to melt from the heat of fear. The drive back was a journey toward an invisible execution. Marcellus drove with studied calm, wiping his eyes every now and then, like someone drying tears. He put on classical music at a low volume, the same kind he used to listen to when he wanted to relax. But to me, it sounded like the funeral march of my own destiny. I sat in the passenger seat, watching the rain hit the glass harder and harder. I felt the folded paper in the crease of my hijab as if it were a burning stone. I wanted to read it right there, but I was afraid Marcellus would notice. I glanced at him sideways. The man I had been married to for 10 years suddenly seemed like a complete stranger. I went over the last few months in my mind again. Zion's complaints of stomach pain, his sudden weakness, the long naps that weren't normal for a healthy child, and especially Marcellus's insistence that only the family's trusted doctor could treat him. Something horrible was taking shape in my mind. When we arrived home, the atmosphere was quieter. Most of the Moores had left. Only a few relatives remained, gathering chairs in the backyard. I said I felt dizzy and needed to lie down. Marcellus offered to make me some hot tea, but I replied that I just wanted to sleep. I entered the bedroom, locked the door, and leaned my back against it, trying to control my breathing. I waited until I heard his footsteps moving away toward the kitchen. Then, with trembling hands, I took out the little paper hidden in my hijab. It was a page torn from a school notebook with rushed, almost illegible handwriting. I read it under the dim light of the bedside lamp. Zion didn't have heart problems. They changed his medicine for low doses of poison, checked the teddy bear in his room. He recorded something before he died. "Be careful. Your husband is dangerous." The world came crashing down on me. My knees lost their strength and I let myself fall to the floor. My baby, my little Zion, hadn't died of a mysterious illness. They had poisoned him little by little, and the person who had done it was in my kitchen right now, making tea, pretending to be a shattered father. The unbearable pain that had torn me apart until then transformed into something harder and sharper. Rage. My tears dried up instantly. I understood that crying could wait. What couldn't wait was the truth. I got up as best I could and tiptoed out of the room, heading to Zian's bedroom, which was next to the master suite. I opened the door carefully. The smell of baby cologne and lotion still floated in the air. So familiar it shrank my heart. Everything was just as he had left it. The building blocks on the floor, the superhero posters on the walls, the storybooks scattered on the nightstand. Sitting on the bed was his big brown teddy bear, the one he hugged every night to sleep, the gift I had given him 2 years ago for his birthday. I approached the bear and caressed its soft fur with shaking hands. I noticed something strange on its back, a seam that was a bit thick, as if someone had opened and closed it in a hurry with clumsy stitches. I remembered that he had been taught to sew at school, and sometimes practiced on his toys. I went to the desk, opened a drawer, and took out a nail clipper with a small metal file. I went back to the bear and started to unstitch it carefully. Amidst the white fiber stuffing appeared a small digital recorder, a spy toy that my friend Khalil had given him a long time ago. Zion loved playing detective. I felt a chill as I pressed the play button. Zion's voice sounded weak and hoarse, very different from the cheerful one that used to fill the house. Today my tummy hurt again after Dad gave me the red medicine. It tastes really bitter, not like the one Mom gives me. I'm scared to tell Mom. Then Dad gets mad like that one time. Dad says it's a super vitamin to make me strong, but I feel worse every time. The audio continued with the sound of a door opening and heavy footsteps approaching. Then I clearly heard Marcellus's voice talking on the phone with someone. His tone was calm, almost bored. "Don't worry, Mr. Sterling. I already upped the dose. The kid won't make it to next week. As soon as he dies, his grandfather's inheritance is released to the guardian's account, meaning mine. Then we split it 50-50 like we agreed. You just make sure the paperwork for the foundation property is ready to change names." The recording cut off. The silence in the room became deafening. I covered my mouth with both hands to contain a scream that was fighting to get out. Everything was spinning. My husband, the man with whom I had shared 10 years of life, had poisoned our son to keep the inheritance money my father had left in Zion's name. And the respectable Mr. Sterling, president of the Educational Foundation, was his accomplice. They were monsters, not men. At that instant, the doorknob of the room began to jiggle. Someone was trying to enter, but I had locked it. "Amara." I heard Marcellus's voice on the other side. "Why is the door locked? Are you in there? Open it." His tone was no longer that of a sweet husband. There was hardness, suspicion, a veiled threat. He banged on the door insistently. "Open up, Amara. Don't make me break it down." I backed away, clutching the bear and the recorder against my chest. I was trapped. My son's killer was on the other side of the door, and the most terrifying part was that he knew I already knew his secret. The blows against the door became brutal. Each impact made the pictures on the wall vibrate. Marcellus was screaming my name with a voice disfigured by rage and panic, a roar that mixed desperation and cruelty. I knew that as soon as he managed to get in, my life would be hanging by a thread. Marcellus was no longer my husband. He was a cornered animal, willing to destroy anything that could expose him. I tucked the recorder into the inner pocket of my tunic. The only thing I now had to demand justice, I had to find another way out. The door was out of the question. Only the window remained. Zian's room was on the second floor. I remembered the sycamore tree growing next to the house, with its thick branches reaching quite close to the room's small balcony. More than once I had scolded Zion for daring to climb it. Now that childish mischief could save my life. I ran to the window, unlocked the latch with trembling hands, and threw it wide open. The night air, heavy with rain, hit my face like a bucket of ice water. Outside, the storm had intensified. Lightning illuminated the garden for split seconds. Thunder masked the blows Marcellus was dealing to the door. The cracking of wood warned me the door wouldn't hold much longer. Without giving myself time to think, I climbed onto the balcony railing and felt for a branch of the tree with my foot. It was wet and slippery, but it was that or die in there. I launched myself, clinging to the branch with both hands. The rough bark scratched my palms, but I held on. My soaked tunic got caught on a thin branch. I pulled with all my strength until I heard the sound of fabric tearing. It didn't matter. The only important thing was getting down. Just as my feet finally touched the muddy grass of the garden, I heard a crash upstairs. Marcellus had broken down the bedroom door. I looked up and saw him in the doorway, bathed in the overhead light. He ran to the balcony and leaned out, searching the darkness, cursing loudly. I pressed myself against the tree trunk, holding my breath. A flash of lightning lit up the yard for a second. If he had looked down at that instant, he would have seen me, but the curtain of rain made it hard to see, and furious he went back inside the room, perhaps thinking I was still hiding in there. I didn't waste a second, barefoot with my feet sinking into the mud. I slipped along the side wall of the house and headed for the back garden gate, the one the gardener used. I knew that as soon as Marcellus discovered I wasn't in the room, he would search the whole house and then come out looking for me. I had to put as much distance as possible between us before he woke the security guards or called any of his contacts. Mr. Sterling had friends everywhere. I no longer knew who I could trust. Every shadow seemed like an enemy. Every tree trunk a figure lying in wait. With my heart racing and tears mixing with the rain on my face, I managed to open the small back gate and stepped out onto the dark path that ran behind the subdivision. There was no one there. I ran without looking back, the recorder clutched in my pocket until I reached a main avenue about a mile away. My phone, soaked in my pocket, vibrated several times. I assumed it was Marcellus. I refused to answer. I couldn't leave him even the slightest clue of where I was. Taking shelter under the awning of a closed shop, gasping for air, I took out my mobile with fingers numb from the cold. I saw 10 missed calls from Marcellus. I ignored them and searched for a name in my contact list. Khalil, my best friend since high school, the only person I could trust, an investigative journalist, stubborn and used to dealing with dirty cases. I dialed his number with shaking hands, praying he wasn't asleep. It rang a couple of times, and then I heard his sleepy voice. Amara, what happened? I couldn't give too many explanations. With my voice broken by crying, I barely managed to whisper. Khalil, help me. Marcellus killed Zion. I'm near the gas station on the highway. Come get me. Don't ask anything right now. Just come fast. I hung up before he could react and turned off the phone so no one could track my location. I curled up in a dark corner next to the shop's metal shutter, hugging my knees, shaking with fear and cold, hoping Khalil would arrive before Marcellus found me. 15 minutes felt like 15 years. Every car light approaching made my heart stop for an instant, expecting to see Marcellus's black SUV. However, finally, an old gray sedan pulled up in front of me. The passenger side window rolled down, and I saw Khalil's worried face. I jumped up and got into the car without saying a word, slamming the door shut. I must have looked pitiful, soaked, covered in mud, a total mess. My hands scratched and my face pale as a ghost. Khalil shot me a quick glance. He understood the situation was serious and sped off without asking questions. Inside the car, the contrast of the heater made me shiver even more. It wasn't just cold. It was my body unloading the adrenaline. Khalil passed me his jacket from the back seat and covered my shoulders. He drove with one hand while squeezing mine with the other, trying to transmit calm. I started telling him everything from Miss Vanna's call, the scene at the school, Marcellus's double life to the recording hidden in Zion's bear. Every word was like spitting out broken glass. When I played the audio, he pulled the car over to the curb and listened intently, his face transforming as the sentences from Marcellus and Mr. Sterling came out of the small device. When it finished, he hit the steering wheel in rage, letting out curses against Marcellus and Sterling. Then he listened to the recording again, but this time with the cold mind of a journalist. He said it was very strong evidence, but also very dangerous. Mr. Sterling wasn't just anybody. He had political influence, contacts in the police force, and surely expensive lawyers. If we just walked into a neighborhood precinct, the recorder could disappear. Or worse, they could silence us before we opened our mouths. He decided to take me to a safe place, a small apartment on the outskirts of the city that had belonged to his late uncle, a place not even his family knew he still used occasionally. That apartment would become our shelter and operation center. On the way, Khalil turned on the radio to break the oppressive silence. At first, traffic news played, then the announcer interrupted with an urgent bulletin. The lifeless body of a woman has been found in the courtyard of an elementary school on Magnolia Street. The victim has been identified as a teacher, initials VS. The preliminary hypothesis points to a possible suicide after jumping from the third floor of the school building. I felt the blood stop circulating. I started screaming inside the car. Vanna, they killed her. I sobbed. Marcellus and Mr. Sterling killed her, and now they say it was suicide. The guilt whipped me with violence worse than any physical blow. If I had gone earlier, if I had tried to get her out of the school with me, maybe she would still be alive. But I had left her there alone in front of those monsters. I cried with my whole body hitting the dashboard. Khalil pulled over, turned off the engine, and hugged me tightly, letting me vent that impossible pain. In the midst of my crying, something inside me changed. The pain stopped crushing me and hardened into a cold, sharp determination. My tears dried up. I pulled away from Khalil and stared at the dark road ahead. I remembered Vanna's look when she whispered, "Run!" She couldn't have died in vain. Neither could Zion. It wasn't enough for Marcellus and Sterling to go to jail. No, that would be too easy for them. They had to feel fear, helplessness, shame. They had to see their lives destroyed, just as they had destroyed mine. I looked at Khalil with a new resolve. I told him with a calm that even scared me that I didn't just want legal justice. I wanted to ruin those men's lives down to the roots. Make them breathe the same terror they made Zion and Vanna live through. Khalil held my gaze for a few seconds and nodded silently, accepting that dark pact between the two of us. We decided not to go to the police yet. Before that, we needed more evidence. Something so undeniable that neither influence nor lawyers could knock it down. The recording alone could be dismissed as a fake. We needed to get the bottle of poison Marcellus had used on Zion, the physical proof of the crime. We were sure he wouldn't destroy it immediately out of vanity, out of excessive confidence in his impunity, or simply out of carelessness. That night in the dusty little apartment, we stopped being victims and became hunters. I cut my hair to my shoulders, threw away my torn black dress, and put on simple clothes that had belonged to Khalil's uncle. The submissive Amara, the docile wife, had died with my son. Dawn was just breaking when we sat down to plan my return to the snake pit, not as a repentant wife, but as a ghost coming to unearth their secrets. We knew Marcellus worked as the director of operations in the corporate building of Sterling's foundation. Every Friday, an external cleaning company did a deep clean of the offices. That would be my way in. Khalil, an expert at getting into places he wasn't invited, hacked the cleaning company's system, and registered me on the temporary staff list with a false identity. He turned me into Sade, a maintenance worker with credentials and a uniform. In front of the bathroom mirror in the apartment, I tied a dark blue hijab, one of those practical ones used by women working long shifts, and put on the light blue uniform, slightly too big for me. I put on thick-rimmed glasses and powdered my face unevenly, dulling my features. The woman reflected back was no longer Amara. She was someone else. Khalil parked the car 2 blocks from the Foundation's corporate building. I got out pushing a cart with buckets, brooms, and mops, blending in with the rest of the cleaning staff entering through the service door. The guard barely looked at us. He didn't even look up to register our faces. We, the people at the bottom, are invisible. I passed the security check without a problem using the cloned card Khalil had prepared from a careless employee's. I took the freight elevator up to the 12th floor where Marcellus's office was located. The hallway was carpeted, silent, and cold. I pushed the cart to the double door with the sign, Director of Operations. I swiped the card through the reader. The light turned green, and the lock clicked. I entered. The office was spacious and elegant with dark wood furniture and a large window overlooking part of the city. On the wall behind the desk hung a photograph of us, Marcellus, Zion, and me, smiling in a park. I wanted to rip it down with one claw. Marcellus hadn't hung that photo out of love, but as part of his mask of the exemplary family man. I knew, because I had seen it once by accident, that behind an abstract painting on another wall lay a hidden safe. I removed the painting carefully, and there was the digital panel. I swallowed hard. The code was Zion's date of birth. The irony turned my stomach. I punched in 1703, and the green light came on. I opened the safe, expecting to find the bottle of poison. It wasn't there. There were stacks of cash, property documents in Marcellus's name, passports with different stamps, papers transferring Foundation land to private accounts. It was pure corruption, but it still didn't prove murder. I took photographs with the tiny camera hidden in one of my buttons, one by one, leaving nothing unrecorded. Then I heard laughter and footsteps approaching down the hall. Panic hit me like a heat stroke. I closed the safe, hung the painting back up, a little crooked from the haste, and hid behind a large sofa near the desk, pretending to clean the baseboards. The door opened. Marcellus and a young woman, very dressed up in a fitted dress and high heels, walked in. It was Sarah, his secretary, whom I had always seen getting too close to him. They didn't notice my presence, protected by the height of the sofa back and the shadow of a filing cabinet. What I heard next burned me from the inside. Marcellus didn't seem like a grieving man. He was laughing with Soraya while pouring whiskey into 2 glasses. She sat flirtatiously on the edge of the desk and stroked his arm. They talked about Zion's death as if commenting on the satisfactory closing of a business deal. Soraya told him his performance at the funeral had been perfect, that even Mr. Sterling had been impressed with his grieving father act. Marcellus took pride in himself, saying that getting rid of that sickly kid had been the best thing for his future. He called him a burden, a source of expenses that stopped the inheritance money from flowing into his hands. I felt my nails digging into my palms. I wanted to come out and beat them to a pulp, but I knew I would lose. Instead, I activated the small recording microphone I had in my pants pocket and let every word of that conversation be registered. They talked about a trip to Europe they planned to take when everything calmed down and the millions hit his account. They mocked me, my desperate flight. Marcella said they wouldn't take long to find my corpse lying around somewhere, that everyone would believe I had gone crazy from grief. He called me weak, useless without him. And there's nothing they can prove, he added, kissing Soraya's temple. I already sent the poison bottle to be incinerated with the medical waste this morning. No trace left. That sentence was a low blow. The bottle, our hope, no longer existed. But we obtained something just as powerful, an arrogant admission, the confession that they believed they had won. When they finally left for lunch, I waited several minutes inside my hiding place until I was sure. Before leaving, I took out of my pocket the toy car Zion used to carry in his backpack, something I had kept since the night before, and left it in the middle of the desk, right on top of Marcellus's organized files, so he would know his past was coming for him. I went back to the apartment with Khalil, and we listened to the recording together. Khalil had to go out to the balcony to smoke so he wouldn't explode. He knew the audio was devastating, but it was still the fruit of an illegal recording, and they could try to throw it out in court. We needed them to sink themselves in public, to betray each other in front of witnesses, cameras, and microphones. The most effective way to make a criminal commit mistakes is to provoke fear, and we knew that Marcellus, cold as he was, had a crack. The terror of the supernatural, of karma, of punishment from things he couldn't control. Years ago, when we were newly married, he had confessed to me that ghost stories terrified him, that he was obsessed with the idea that bad deeds returned, multiplied. He had tried to drown that fear in cynicism and money, but it was still there. Khalil had managed to hack the smart home system of our house. Lights, cameras, audio, air conditioning, everything Marcellus installed to feel safe. We would use it to drive him insane. That same night, the haunting began. From the laptop screen, we watched on the living room camera as he poured himself drink after drink, uneasy, playing with Zion's toy car that someone had left on his office desk. At midnight, Khalil made the living room lights flicker. Marcellus got up bewildered and went to check the switches. When he seemed to calm down, he went up to the bedroom. We lowered the air conditioning temperature to 60 degrees. We saw him shiver in bed, uncovered. Then through the ceiling speakers, we played a soft little giggle of Zanz's mixed with the white noise of the fan. Marcellus sat up instantly, eyes wide, looking for the source of the sound. He asked aloud who was there. We cut the audio. We repeated the game the following nights, increasing the intensity little by little. We never let him sleep for more than a while at a time. On the third day, while he was showering, we filled the bathroom with the recording of Zion's whimpers when his stomach hurt. That fragment that had also remained on the small recorder. The echo on the tiles made it sound ghostly. Marcellus came out of the bathroom slipping, holding on to the furniture, soaking wet, and with his face white as marble. He started screaming for them to leave him alone, that it wasn't possible. Blaming Soraya was his next step. He began calling her nervously, accusing her of playing cruel jokes. Mistrust germinated between them. The culmination of our plan coincided with the Foundation's gala, which would be held at a luxury hotel. Mr. Sterling would give a speech, and Marcellus would be presented with an award as exemplary father for continuing to support the institution despite the tragedy. The title of the recognition turned my stomach. Khalil found a breach in the hotel's Wi-Fi network and accessed the projection and sound system. They had planned an emotional video with photos of Zion. We prepared a very different one, a compilation of their own rot. The night of the event, Khalil and I watched everything from a van parked in the lot with several screens connected to the hotel cameras. We saw Marcellus enter next to Mr. Sterling. Marcellus looked undone, haggarded, hunched over, turning his head every so often as if he feared finding a specter at his back. Soraya was there too, beautiful but annoyed, subjected to his mood swings. When Marcellus went up to the stage to receive the award, the audience applauded him. He took the microphone and started talking about how much he missed his son, with the broken tone he had also rehearsed. I gave the signal to Khalil. The giant screen behind Marcellus, which was supposed to show an animation with Zion's smiling face filled with white noise and a sharp screech, invaded the speakers. Then the image changed to an intense red background, and enormous letters appeared as if written in blood. I know what you did. The ballroom went absolutely silent. Marcellus turned pale as a corpse. At that moment, we unleashed through the speakers the recording of his conversation with Soraya, the one where he called Zion a sickly kid and bragged about destroying the poison bottle. The attendees were left jaw-dropped. Exclamations were heard, chairs dragging, indignant murmurs. Soraya stood up, swaying, about to faint. Mr. Sterling stood up, red with rage and shame. Marcellus tried to take control of the microphone, shouting that it was all a setup, that they were slandering him. But his voice drowned amidst the wave of reproaches and camera flashes. The worst for him came when he saw Mr. Sterling whisper something to the head of security. He understood in a second that they planned to use him as a scapegoat, leave him alone, facing public opinion, to save the Foundation's image. "You!" Marcellus shouted from the stage, pointing at Sterling. "It was you who planned everything. The inheritance splitting the money, the poison. If I go down, you go down with me." That accusation, captured by cell phones and TV cameras, would be impossible to erase. The gala turned into chaos. Marcellus escaped through the service exit, chased by journalists. Sterling tried to control the situation, but the scandal had already broken loose on social media. The video went viral in a matter of hours. However, we knew it wasn't enough. Lawyers could allege stress, delusion, a digital deep fake. We needed a final, clearer scene with them describing their crimes themselves while someone listened officially. That night, we went back to the apartment without celebrating. We knew a wounded animal is a dangerous animal. Marcellus was now a social pariah, but still free. Sterling was cornered, but with resources. The next phase of the plan consisted of pitting the two against each other, making them believe the other was betraying them. Khalil prepared 2 burner phones, impossible to trace. On one, we pretended to be Marcellus and texted Sterling. "I have signed copies of all the asset diversion papers. If you don't help me get out of the city tonight and give me my share, they go to the district attorney tomorrow. Meet me at the Foundation's old warehouse at the docks at 2 a.m. alone, or we sink together." We knew Sterling was paranoid and wouldn't dare ignore that threat. On the other phone, we pretended to be an emissary of Sterling and sent a message to Marcellus. "Mr. Sterling wants to fix this. He has prepared a boat to get you out of the country tonight. He wants you to bring all the documents and evidence you have to destroy them. He waits for you at 2:00 a.m. at the Foundation's old warehouse at the docks. The police are already moving. It's now or never. Don't be late." Marcellus, desperate, without allies, and convinced the whole world was chasing him, would see that message as his last lifeline. At 2 a.m., under fierce rain, Khalil and I were already inside the warehouse on a metal loft on the 2nd floor with a perfect view of the main space. It was a large abandoned building near the pier. It smelled of rust and stale seawater. Khalil had placed hidden cameras and microphones connected to a secure server that a contact of his in the Major Crimes Unit also had access to. This time, the police were in the loop. They knew 2 dangerous men were meeting there to talk about dirty money. They just had to wait for them to say enough and then enter. A black sedan arrived first. We saw Sterling get out with a briefcase and 2 bodyguards. He left them outside, signaling them to wait. He entered the warehouse with his right hand inside his jacket. It wasn't hard to imagine he was holding a gun. His face was stone, tensed by rage and fear. Minutes later, the door creaked again. Marcellus entered from the darkness. He wore a wrinkled shirt, his gaze lost. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days. He advanced toward Sterling with a mixture of hope and hate. "Where's the boat?" he asked with a broken voice. "You said you'd get me out of here." Sterling let out a dry laugh. "Boat. Do you really think after what you did at the hotel, I'm going to help you escape? You humiliated me in front of everyone. You're a liability." Marcellus looked at him with disbelief. "But you sent me a message." "I didn't send you anything," Sterling interrupted him. "The only message I got was yours, threatening with the documents. You brought them. Give them to me, and maybe I'll consider letting your corpse show up whole, not in pieces and bags." Marcellus's confusion turned into fury. He understood someone else was pulling the strings, but his hatred toward Sterling was stronger than his survival instinct. "So, you're going to kill me like we killed Zion?" he spat. Go ahead. But remember, you're just as responsible as I am. You got me the poison. You told me to up the dose. You did it to cover your gambling debts. Don't you dare point at me. You were the father, Sterling roared. You put the poison in his mouth every night. I just told you to resolve the inheritance issue. Don't act like a saint, you old hypocrite, Marcellus shouted. We're the same trash. Every word was being recorded by the microphones and broadcast live to Khalil's police contact. There was no room for interpretation. There they were, admitting their participation in the murder of a child and the embezzlement of funds. Suddenly, Sterling pulled out his gun and aimed it at Marcellus's head. It's over. Goodbye, you useless fool. Before he could shoot, police sirens shattered the silence of the night. Red and blue lights filtered through the cracks of the warehouse. A voice over a megaphone ordered them to drop their weapons and surrender. Sterling started, looking toward the entrance. Marcellus took advantage of that distraction to lunge at him. The two rolled on the floor. The gun went flying into a corner where it was out of reach for both. From our hiding place, we watched the brutal fight. Marcellus, younger and stronger, hit Sterling over and over until he knocked him unconscious. But he had no intention of surrendering. He stood up unsteadily and looked around for an exit. His eyes lifted toward the loft where we were. A glint on the camera lens gave away our presence. Our eyes met. For the first time since I fled home, Marcellus saw me. The blue hijab had slipped, leaving my face visible, his features contorted into a grimace of absolute hatred. Amara! He roared, finally recognizing the ghost haunting him. Crazed, he charged up the stairs, ignoring the shouts of the police who were already entering through another door. Khalil grabbed my arm. Run, he told me. Through the roof door. We came out onto the warehouse roof under torrential rain. The wind almost knocked us over. From there, we could see the pier and some squad cars below. On the other side of the building was a metal fire escape leading down to a landing. We headed for it, but the roof door flew open with a kick. Marcellus appeared with a metal bar in his hand, bleeding from his head, eyes wide and wild. Khalil stepped in, trying to stop him. Marcellus dealt a brutal blow to his arm with the bar. I heard a horrible crack. Khalil fell to the ground, screaming in pain, clutching his hanging arm. I ran toward him, but Marcellus grabbed me by the hijab and yanked me backward. I felt my scalp catch fire with pain. He dragged me toward the edge of the roof, using me as a shield when he saw several officers trying to come up the other side. One more step and I throw her, he screamed, pressing the bar against my neck. The officer stopped. The rain soaked us all. I breathed with difficulty, feeling the cold metal on my throat, but I wasn't afraid like before. I was done. Marcellus forced me down the fire escape with him. We reached an old SUV parked between shipping containers, surely stolen. He pushed me into the passenger seat, tied my hands to the roof handle with his own tie, and sat at the wheel. He peeled out like a madman, knocking down the fence and merging onto the avenue with several cruisers behind us. The police cars followed with sirens wailing. Marcellus drove as if he valued neither his life nor mine. He ran red lights, clipped mirrors of other cars, hit puddles that made us skid dangerously. I slammed my shoulder against the door trying to break free, but the tie was too tight. You're not going to escape, I said, voice hoarse. Shut up, he muttered. I'm not going back to being poor. I'm not going to rot in jail. We're going far away. Do you understand, Amara? Far away. He took an elevated viaduct that was under construction. The ground was slippery from the rain, and the road narrowed due to cement blocks. Ahead, flashes of police cars could be seen blocking our path. Marcellus jerked the steering wheel to avoid the barricade, but the car lost traction. The world spun several times. The vehicle skidded, hit the retaining wall sideways, and crashed. The airbags deployed. I felt a sharp impact on my head and a burning pain in my temple. Dazed, I could make out Marcellus beside me, bleeding from his nose, with one leg trapped between the wreckage of the dashboard. Even so, He kept moving. He stumbled open the door and dragged me out, gripping me by the wrists. Outside, the rain kept falling without mercy. He pulled us close to the edge of the viaduct, where barely a few steps separated us from the void. Below, the dark current of an urban river roared. Several squad cars surrounded the vehicle, pointing their weapons at us. Marcellus pressed a piece of broken glass to my neck, right over the carotid. I felt the sharp tip cut my skin, and a trickle of warm blood slide down my collarbone. The police shouted at him to calm down to let me go. The negotiator spoke through a megaphone trying to buy time. Marcellus Delirious demanded a helicopter, money, a clear route. It was absurd. He knew he had no way out, but he clung to that fantasy like a drowning man to a branch. I heard him breathing heavily right behind me, the glass pressing into my throat. And yet, in that moment, my mind filled with a strange serenity. I stopped trembling. I saw his reflection in a puddle. The man I had loved was unrecognizable, devoured by ambition and fear. I thought of Zion, of his small body in the coffin, of Vanna falling from the 3rd floor of the school. They hadn't had a choice. I still did. I glanced quickly down at his feet. Marcellus's right leg was visibly damaged. The torn pant fabric revealed deep wounds, blood mixed with dirty water. That was his weak point. I gathered all the strength I had left. I inhaled deeply, not caring that the glass deepened the cut a little more. Suddenly, I whipped my head back and bit the forearm, holding the glass with all my accumulated rage. I sank my teeth into his flesh until I tasted blood. Marcellus let out a tearing scream. Reflexively, he loosened his hand, and the glass slipped from his fingers. Without wasting a second, I lifted my leg and kicked him with all my might in the damaged knee. A horrible snap echoed. Marcellus's scream was even sharper than before, an almost inhuman howl. His body lost balance, and he fell sideways onto the soaked pavement, writhing in pain. I jumped away, stumbling, but finally out of his grip. The police took advantage of the confusion. Several agents ran toward us and pulled me away from the edge of the bridge. Others lunged at Marcellus, who kicked and struggled, trying to grab anything. One of the officers had to shoot him in the other leg when he tried to snatch his weapon. Everything became confused. Voices, lights, hands. They sat me on the ground, wrapped me in a thermal blanket. A paramedic pressed gauze over the wound on my neck. I said nothing. I just watched as they lifted Marcellus onto a stretcher, handcuffed, bleeding, disfigured. When he passed by me, our eyes met again. There was no longer arrogance, nor superiority, nor hate, only pure fear. Perhaps for the first time, he understood that everything was over. Khalil appeared shortly after, arm in a sling, face bruised. He approached as best he could and wrapped his good arm around me. In that moment, I finally allowed myself to cry. But my tears were no longer just of pain. They were also of relief. The next day, the news spoke in detail about the web of corruption and murder implicating Marcellus and Mr. Sterling. Fragments of the recordings leaked, images of the scandal at the gala, photos of both in handcuffs. Public opinion turned against them. The district attorney took action. Bank accounts were frozen, assets seized. However, the legal punishment was only part of the reckoning. Life or fate took care of the rest. In the prison hospital where Marcellus was admitted, doctors discovered that the leg crushed in the accident had become severely infected. The combination of glass, mud, and asphalt debris had introduced bacteria into the blood. In a matter of hours, the tissue began to rot. To save his life, they had no choice but to amputate his right leg above the knee. Upon waking from anesthesia, Marcellus discovered he would never walk the same way again. He cried, screamed, begged them to give back what he had lost. It was a brutal irony. He, who had destroyed his own son's body, damaging his organs with poison, now saw his own body mutilated. In that hospital bed, tied to a wheelchair, The same person who believed himself invincible, who looked down on the weak, saw himself converted forever into what he despised most. Mr. Sterling didn't come out unscathed either. During his first formal statement at the DA's office, the tension spiked his blood pressure. He suffered a massive stroke. He survived, but half his body was left paralyzed. The man who dominated stages with moving speeches, who manipulated politicians and businessmen with his smooth talk, was reduced to making unintelligible sounds, drooling, bedridden in the prison infirmary. His assets were confiscated. His family washed their hands of him out of shame. He came to depend on strangers' hands, even to eat and go to the bathroom. It was the total ruin of his pride. Saria, Marcellus's secretary and mistress, tried to flee. She was detained at the airport attempting to leave the country with jewelry and cash before the investigators. She betrayed Marcellus without a second thought, handing over records of transfers and compromising emails. She believed that would reduce her sentence, but she couldn't evade responsibility for having collaborated in the cover-up and benefiting from the money. She ended up sentenced to 20 years in prison. In jail, far from expensive suits and luxury hotels, her beauty ceased to be a privilege and became a target for envy and aggression. Khalil and I followed the news with a mix of satisfied rage and exhaustion. We never celebrated their suffering, but we didn't feel pity either. Nothing that happened to them came close to the pain of a child poisoned by his own father, or the terror of a teacher thrown from a third floor for telling the truth. However, at least they were no longer untouchable. One day, I was called to the prison hospital to expand my testimony. Walking down the guarded hallway, I saw Marcellus through a window sitting in a wheelchair. He was barely a shadow of the man he was, thinner, older, with a lost gaze. When he realized I was there, he slowly turned his head. Our eyes crossed one more time. He began to cry silently. His lips moved, trying to form words I couldn't hear. Apologies, perhaps. Tears that arrived too late. For the first time, I felt no hate, only a serene emptiness, an unbreakable distance. I looked at him for a few seconds, long enough for him to understand that I was still standing, that I had survived everything he tried to destroy. Then I turned around and went on my way. I had nothing more to say to him. 6 months passed since that stormy night on the viaduct. Time, though slow, began to close wounds. The scars remained, but they no longer bled. One morning, with a clear sky, I looked at myself in the mirror of my new house, smaller and simpler than the previous one, but full of peace. I put on a soft cream-colored hijab and smoothed the fabric with firm hands. The woman in the mirror was no longer the mother who could barely hold herself up at her son's funeral. She was someone hardened by tragedy. Yes, but also risen above it. Beside me, behind in the reflection, I saw Khalil pass by with a stack of papers and crack a silly joke to lighten the mood. That day, the final sentence would be read. In the courtroom, packed with journalists, representatives of children's associations, and onlookers. The atmosphere was dense. I sat in the front row. Khalil, in a suit and with his arm fully recovered, settled next to me and took my hand. Then the judges entered. The murmurs ceased. 2 officers pushed Marcellus's wheelchair to the defendant's bench. He had his head down. The adjacent bench was empty. Sterling's lawyer represented him because the old man could no longer move. Further away, in another chair, Saria trembled, pale. The prosecutor gave a firm review of all the charges: aggravated homicide against a minor, murder of a key witness, corruption, money laundering. The head judge, a middle-aged woman with severe eyes, began to read the resolution. The room held a reverent silence. Her words, though formal, had the force of a stone thrown into water. She declared Marcellus guilty on all counts, and underlining the cruelty and premeditation of his acts, she dictated the maximum penalty: death. Gasps were heard, exclamations. a thank God barely contained in the back of the room. Marcellus began to shake. He broke down, crying with an ugly, desperate sob that moved no one. Mr. Sterling was given life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The judge noted that although sick, his moral and legal responsibility was absolute. His broken body would spend the rest of the years he had left in a prison bed. The tribunal gave Soraya 20 years in prison. When the judge banged the gavel 3 times, I felt something inside me finally close. The legal chapter had concluded. Leaving the courthouse, the fresh air of the street tasted different. It wasn't absolute freedom because nothing would bring Zion back, but it was a first step toward a life in which my son wasn't just a victim, but also a seed of something good. All the money involved in my father's inheritance and in Marcellus and Sterling's schemes was recovered after a long legal process in which Khalil worked his fingers to the bone. The state intended to keep a good part, but we managed to prove it was Zion's patrimony. Even so, I was clear that I couldn't keep that money for myself. I saw it stained with blood. I decided to turn it into something that honored my son. We found an old building on the outskirts of the city and completely remodeled it. At the entrance, we hung a colorful sign, Zion's House, Foundation for Child Protection and Education. I wanted that place to be a refuge for abused, mistreated, or abandoned children. Those whom no one believed or listened to. A place where they could sleep without fear, study, play, have psychologists, teachers, affection. I walked through the freshly painted halls adorned with children's drawings. In the courtyard, a group of kids played soccer. Others took turns on the swings. Their laughter resonated like a kind echo in my chest. In the main lobby, we hung a large photograph of Zion smiling and next to it, one of Miss Vanna. With part of the money, we also financed the renovation of the school where she had worked, including a new library named the Vanna Library, so her name would remain linked to education and not tragedy. As evening fell, when the sun began to color the sky orange, Khalil and I went to the cemetery. Zion's and Vanna's graves were next to each other under the shade of a magnolia tree with fragrant white flowers that leaned protectively over them. The grass was green and well kept, adorned with fresh flowers that anonymous people left from time to time. I crouched before Zion's headstone, running my fingers over his name carved in the marble. This time there was no despair in my eyes like before. There was nostalgia, yes, but mixed with a new peace. "It's done, my love," I whispered. "We got justice. They won't hurt anyone ever again. Your money now serves to keep other children safe. You don't have to feel pain anymore. You can play all you want up there." The wind gently moved the branches of the tree, and some white petals fell onto the grave. I closed my eyes and prayed long and deeply, giving God my gratitude, my grief, and my son's entire life. When I finished, I stood up. That was when I saw something at the end of the gravel path. About 30 ft away, amidst the golden light of sunset, the silhouette of a boy was outlined. He was wearing pajamas with the drawing of Zion's favorite superhero, the same outfit I put on him the last night he spent at home. His hair was messy, and his eyes bright as always. He didn't look sick or tired. On the contrary, he radiated health and joy. I felt no fear. He looked at me with a huge smile, so luminous it almost hurt. He raised his right hand and waved at me with a small gesture. A goodbye. "And I'm okay, Mom." I felt a single tear slide down my cheek. I returned the wave with a trembling hand and a smile that for the first time in a long time was sincere. "See you soon, sweetie," I murmured. Zion's figure faded little by little with the light of the setting sun until it disappeared, but the warmth he left in my chest remained there. He was at peace. I could finally accept that I wouldn't hug him again, but also that he wasn't suffering. I turned around. Khalil was waiting for me a few steps back without asking questions. With that silent patience he had always had with me, he held out his hand. I took it firmly. We walked out of the cemetery side by side, leaving behind years of pain, fear, and guilt. In front of me, the city lit its lights one by one as if a new curtain were opening. I had a whole life ahead of me, full of children who would need protection, stories that deserved to be heard, wounds that perhaps I could help heal. I was no longer just the mother who lost her son, nor the betrayed wife. I was Amara, the woman who walked through the storm and remained standing, founder of Zion's House and defender of children who have no voice. And for the first time in a long time, thinking about the future, I could say in silence, yes. Did you like the story? And which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you like the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep bringing more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. I'm looking forward to your comments on the story. On the screen, you can see 2 new life stories that I highly recommend. There's so much more on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. See you in the next life story. With love and respect.